very post-apocalyptic. I mean, I think the scale is much broader and it's affecting more areas. But what I saw in Beit Hanun was post-apocalyptic. You know, neighborhoods that have just been bombed out, that are abandoned, that are that are, like, it's you never know. You go through a house, you find a body, you don't know. Like, is there bodies? How many bodies are there here? It's like every day was like, we're advanced, we're spreading out, building a perimeter around the engineers who are there to demolish the tunnels. We were told that there were no civilians in the areas that we were in, that they had all been warned and they had all fled. And therefore, we would basically go into every house that we went into with live fire, firing grenades, firing shoulder fire rockets. It was almost entirely true that the civilians had left, but it wasn't entirely true. How on earth did they not avoid killing this family in this area that was cleared? That we went house to house, we eliminated any threat. There was nothing in that neighborhood that posed a threat. I just kind of like left with this thought and this reflection of like, how do we avoid this from happening again? How do this is horrific. Um, what I saw. Um, and and there was something that like really kind of dedicated my life kind of in many ways to answering that question. You don't have to have empathy to just understand that like this is this is not the mechanics of this. We are destroying these people's lives. We are crushing any hope that they can have collective freedom and independence, something that's so valuable to us that we cherish, that we hold on to. And you think that they're fighting against us because like the textbooks, they don't need any textbooks. Grow up in a neighborhood that's been bombed out. Grow up in a neighborhood where you don't have the right to travel freely, that you're one of my units, Sayeret Nachal, the unit that I served in, was one of the few units that was actually stationed on the Gaza border on October 7th. And I don't know, so like a dozen soldiers. Was one of the units that was very, very heavily suffered, very heavy casualties, but they fought off dozens of Hamas fighters. They saved an entire kibbutz from being massacred. Um, and there's a lot of bravery. There's a lot of really heroic things that IDF did on October 7th.
This might be an impossible question, but what would you say to the people, the soldiers, Israeli soldiers in Gaza today? I'm talking to a dear friend of mine, Benzi Sanders. Benzi and I go back to my college days. We used to wrestle together. I have incredibly fond memories of Benzi from that time period, but a lot has happened since then. Currently, Benzi is the Jerusalem director at an organization called Extend. Benzi runs justice and human rights oriented programs in Jerusalem and the West Bank regarding the occupation and the current conflict. Benzi, thank you so much for talking with me today. And yeah, to start, I'd just love to hear a little bit more about what you're doing these days.
Yeah, thanks, Amichai. It's great to be in conversation with you. I too also have such fond memories of those days in the YU wrestling room. Um, and yeah, now we're 6,000 miles away. I'm here in Jerusalem. And since the war broke out, since the Hamas massacre on October 7th, my work and my life, and I mean really for so many Israelis, has changed. Obviously, this kind of very existential fear that we all felt on that day, and that has continued. But the work that I was doing surrounding the conflict, surrounding bringing people to the West Bank to meet with Palestinians, to meet with human rights experts, has shifted because of a safety concern, because people aren't flying to the country, because people don't have capacity. Honestly, we actually had a partner that we were a Palestinian partner who was speaking to, we were in discussion with speaking with having him speak with a variety of groups who was killed in the bombing in uh, you know uh, Israeli bombing since October 7th in the Gaza Strip. Many peace activists, none of whom were like direct partners who we were planning on speaking with, um, uh, were killed in the attack. But many of the people who we have been in touch with and uh, had plans to visit over in October, November, December, spent October 7th like fearing for their lives as Hamas terrorists murdered their neighbors. Um, and basically, we can get into this a little bit more um, uh, later in the discussion, but one of the ways I got involved in this type of work, one of the main things that pushed me to get involved in this type of work was the experience I had serving in the IDF, and in particular serving in the Gaza Strip in 2014, in a war that was fighting against Hamas, the same enemy who carried out the massacre on October 7th. And basically, I've been outspoken in criticizing Israeli policy. So there was a lot of attention, a lot of media attention that was kind of sent my way, um, in the weeks after the massacre, and I was speaking out about what I experienced, what the reflections I had after that war, and basically arguing that Israeli policy has for years been actually strengthening Hamas. Um, Not only materially, they literally facilitated the transfer of hundreds of millions of dollars to Hamas, but also uh, politically and strategically. Um, the Israeli governments, successive Israeli governments, have been first and foremost primarily concerned not with the safety of Israelis and not with peace, but rather with maximalist, expansionist settlement projects in the West Bank. And as they are kicking Palestinians off of their land, further impugning on Palestinians' rights, um, and making very extremist, maximalist statements and plans and implementing them on territorial and settlement expansion, they have turned Hamas basically into a kind of a tacit ally, because um, it's much easier to carry out that plan when you have the Palestinian leadership divided between with one of the elements of the Palestinian movement being this extremist terrorist group that has no legitimacy, that can't go get recognized and be taken seriously in international bodies at the UN, at the International Criminal Court, and so forth. And so it actually was infuriating to me that for years I was speaking out against this, because I literally was sent to fight against this group in the IDF, risk my life, witness all of this destruction that was caused to Palestinian civilians and residents of northern Gaza, where I was sent, and just to see that my government wasn't even really seriously doing anything to prevent that from happening again. So that's basically, I've been in various platforms, whether it's in the New York Times and lots of different television outlets. I've been just being interviewed and just saying this very simple message in different ways, kind of that like we need to pursue a political solution, and the only real existential threat to Hamas is a political solution where Palestinians and Israelis live side by side with equal rights and self-determination. Because you can't just bomb this problem away. You can kill tens of thousands of Palestinians, of Gazans, of Hamas fighters. They'll just recruit more, because unless you provide some kind of alternative, um, they'll just be able to recruit more people to fight against you. Whether it's Hamas or it's another, extremist group.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you so much for sharing that. I mean, when I talk to some of my friends, who are to the right of me and are supporters of the war, and I say, like, how can you support something like this? And the response is, we have no choice. We have no choice. And I just think that it's such a cop out. That's such a self-serving response, and it totally underestimates the power that the Israeli government has in making in determining who does and who doesn't have resources, and who does and doesn't have authority, and who isn't an ally or an enemy for peace. In his book, I did some videos on my channel on Ami Ayalon's book, Friendly Fire, and he talks a lot about exactly what you said. How when Ariel Sharon pulled out of Gaza, it was done, in a way to be completely unilateral, to not have anything to do with the Palestinian Authority, to divide the Palestinian people, to make sure that there would be a power vacuum that can create a kind of chaos that would delegitimize the Palestinian claim to self-determination. So anyway, I think the message that you're spreading and you're sending is yeah, so crucial. Could we talk about your biography
That's a
a little
great
bit?
book, by the way. I read that book by Amiyai alone, and I have an enormous amount of respect for him. I think in many ways he's predicted this catastrophe. I mean, maybe not to the scale, but he knew that this was going to blow up in our faces, and he warned the Israeli public on so many different platforms that the Israeli policy was empowering the terrorist groups and strengthening them. So yeah, I'm glad you did a piece on that. That's an excellent book. I've been recommending it to lots of people. I have a lot of respect for Amiyai alone. I've been in touch with him over the years. He's a big supporter of breaking the silence, which is where I worked for many years.
He has a section about breaking the silence in his book. I remember that. Yeah, and he talks about his support for breaking the silence. Yeah, that's amazing. I would love to just sort of talk about your biography, Benzi. I mean, we grew up, I think, in a very similar kind of milieu. We went through a very similar schooling system. And I think as I've said to other people I've spoken to, like you and I, we didn't turn out the way I think many of our friends did, for example, politically speaking. So yeah, could you just talk about sort of where you came from and how you evolved over the years?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, we went to modern Orthodox high schools. So I went to Yesodei HaTorah, Gap Year Yeshiva, like almost everyone in my graduating class. And I was, one of there's always a few um, people who really have a transformative experience to the point that they feel like they can't go back. And they want to stay in Israel, in yeshiva, or make aliyah. People have go in different directions, but I decided I wanted to stay in yeshiva. I wanted to make aliyah. Just was very, very swept up with the kind of the religious and historical meaning and significance of the creation of the state of Israel. And I wanted to be part of it. I wanted to, deepen my Torah study, my religious study, and I wanted, I knew that I really started thinking about it in kind of redemptive, like as part of this redemptive arc of Jewish history. And I just felt so privileged to be living at a time where Jewish people who were, who like clung to the faith of being of the ingathering of exiles, of going back to the land of Israel as they were persecuted from generation to generation, and so I felt like I had an obligation to be part of it, to stay. And I knew that everything was only possible because Israel had a strong military that had basically defended it time after time from the invading armies, from horrific terrorist attacks. And yeah, so I just, I made that decision. I went to a second year of yeshiva. During that year, I made Aliyah, I became an Israeli citizen officially. I spent another year after that in an Israeli Hesder yeshiva in Ma'ale Adumim, which is very similar to Gush Etzion, Yeshivat Har Etzion.
Mhm.
And then I was drafted. I was drafted into the IDF. Um, and that was kind of I left the kind of yeshiva student track, Hesder, which is like a shortened service, and I tried out for a special forces unit. I was in a reconnaissance, it's called Sayeret Nachal. Um, and the first 14 months of my service were basically training, the reconnaissance unit. So like a lot of advanced navigation training, advanced like urban warfare, open terrain warfare. And I completed my training. I graduated. I had this like very dramatic, exciting ceremony. Got my unit pin. And then we got our first assignment. And our
For a
first
second, how did
assignment
your
was to
family
be.
feel about all this?
How do my family feel about all this? They were had like mixed feelings in the beginning, but like I think I didn't really give them a choice. It was kind of like this is what I'm doing, and they came to kind of cope with it, and then they became prouder after a while. They were skeptical, that I really had like weighed all of the, you know, like most 19-year-olds probably making, life-changing decisions. Like if I fully appreciated the gravity of the decision. Um, but yeah, ultimately they were supportive and they were proud, especially once I joined the IDF. Um,
And how was the training? Did you enjoy it? Was it hard? Did you make strong connections with people?
yeah, it was definitely a challenge, like a cultural shock. It was physically very challenging, but I was like, I was like a kind of a gritty wrestler. I was in I was in the Boy Scouts growing up, so I was always like outdoors, always kind of challenging myself. So I was able to kind of, that's how I got accepted. I had to try out for the Special Forces unit, and yeah, like it was like culturally. I was also one of the few religious soldiers in the unit. I was also one of the few, immigrants. Like I didn't speak Hebrew, like, super fluently at the very beginning. People were making fun of me for my accent and stuff. But I really believed in what I was doing. And I think that was kind of, that pulled me through. I did ultimately make very, very strong bonds with the people I served with. It definitely took time. Um, I would say like maybe a year in, I think it was when I really started bonding with the guys that I was with, and we became lifelong friends. I'm still like kind of lifelong friends with these people. Um, and but yeah, it was challenging. Um, but I think that my real struggles started, the real difficulties that I had really started only after training.
Hmm. Okay.
Um, which yeah, which was again like about a year and 2 months in. Um, I got my first assignment. They said, okay, you finish your training, you train for all these kind of different types of warfare, reconnaissance unit, learning how to direct, sneak behind enemy lines and direct artillery strikes, leading a much larger force. And then, they said, okay, but you're now going to be sent into the West Bank, to the Shomron, the northern West Bank, and you're going to be in a settlement. And this is like what's called in Hebrew bitachon shotef. This is going to be like a routine security mission, and like most of the training that you guys did is not relevant for this particular assignment. You're going to be just kind of doing patrols. Every now and then you'll maybe go out and make some arrests. You'll have lots of protests that you'll have to disperse. And we had like a kind of a 4-day training module about how to do these patrols, how to what's called set up flying checkpoints. Basically, our job was to be basically visible to kind of what's called, hafganat nukhut in Hebrew, like making your presence felt, uh, being out on the roads. First of all, you want Palestinians to see you. Sometimes you have to set up these checkpoints. Every shift that you're on patrol, you are supposed to kind of set up what's called a mobile checkpoint or a flying checkpoint where you have like a kit in the back of your Jeep. You lay out these tire spikes and you start just waving cars over to the side of the road. Just check their ID. You're not looking for anyone in particular, but you're just kind of like making them feel like every time you go out of Shechem, Nablus, this big Palestinian city in our area, like there's a chance that soldiers could stop you. And there's all these kind of like red lines in between the settlements, the Israeli settlements and the Palestinian villages where Palestinians aren't allowed to walk. There are roads that they're not allowed to walk on, and sometimes they organize protests because they want to be able to walk on the road. They want to be able to drive on certain roads, but they're not allowed to. And so as soon as they start walking or marching down the road, we have to fire tear gas at them, or sometimes rubber coated bullets at the knees or below of these protesters. And all of these things, all the things I'm describing, rubber coated bullets, tear gas, how to make arrests, none of that was part of my training, like my 14 months of training. It was only like when we got this assignment, we spent like 4 days in a different base, learning how to use the riot protest dispersal, the tear gas, the rubber coated bullets, how to make arrests, how to do patrols, how to set up checkpoints. It was kind of like, this isn't really what you're here for, but like this is what we have to do. And as I'm deployed in this area, doing this day in, day out, uh, you know, stationed inside an Israeli settlement in an area that's surrounded with Palestinian villages, Palestinian cities, um, all around them, I start kind of like asking myself, like, what is going on here? Like I never really, maybe vaguely had this concept of like, oh, the West Bank, the Six Day War, settlements, but I didn't really fully understand what it involved and entailed. And so I began kind of asking myself these questions in lots of different moments as I remember arresting like a young kid who at one of these protests that we would go to and disperse every Friday, basically, these Palestinians from this village called Kadum. Basically, they closed the main road. A settlement was built right in between this village called Kadum and the city of Nablus, which is the big city. And they had to do this very circuitous, inconvenient route. And so every Friday they would organize a protest march. They would start marching down the road, and obviously we would meet them. We would fire tear gas at them. They would throw rocks at us. We would shoot them with rubber coated bullets sometimes. And then, one day we decided we're going to go into the village then on Thursday night before the protest, and we're going to like arrest like a dozen protesters. So we went, I was assigned one of these houses, and we made all sorts of arrests. Sometimes were, more serious threats, but in this case, these are like teenagers. These are young men. Sometimes some of them are not even adults who are like throwing rocks at the soldiers during the protest. And so we go in the middle of the night, we barge into the house. We're going and we're waking up the whole family and looking for our target. And we go into the bedroom and like I remember the room is like there's bunk beds, like these, it's the children of the family. And one of the brothers basically were there to arrest him. But we wake up his other brother, and his other brother jumps out of bed in his pajamas and starts like fighting. So he starts throwing punches at the soldiers. And obviously, we subdue him. We arrest his brother. We make our way out of the house. Uh, by the time we make that arrest, like a jeep is already downstairs. We put the kid in the jeep, and he drives off. And then as we're walking back towards our base, we're told to go back to the house and to arrest the other brother who fought back, even though he wasn't our original target. Now he's implicated because he fought against soldiers. And so we arrest him, and just remember kind of being stuck with him on the outskirts of the village, which also I had been responsible for. There was a time that there was an elderly couple who was like they were picking like uh, herbs or something from a field outside of their village, and they had crossed some imaginary red line that the army decided, they're not allowed to cross. And so I remember like showing up with all my full combat gear and just like, with my friends, basically like yelling at this couple, this middle-aged couple, um, just like, you're not allowed to be here, go back to your village. And they're like showing us these bags with leaves. And I just, I had all these moments. So go back to this arrest story. So we were just stuck waiting because it was like a wave of arrests. They were arresting like a dozen people. We were stuck outside of this village with this kid who was like 15 or 16 years old in his pajamas. And he was like blindfolded and handcuffed. And I remember just looking at him, and like it was one of the moments where I was like, what am I doing? Like, what are we're not, we're shutting down their roads. We're shutting down, we're restricting their movements. Like, we shut down their roads. So they protest. So we disperse their protests. So they throw rocks at us. So we arrest them. And then when we're going to arrest them, another kid gets involved. And it just like, I realized like, this is not defending the existence of this lofty goal of defending the existence of the existence of the state of Israel. This is kind of like this grinding conflict that we're perpetuating because we haven't decided what the final status of this territory is, and we have these Israelis living inside kind of a hostile population that doesn't have they're under military occupation. They're not They don't have the right to vote in Israel. They don't have their own country that they're part of with clear borders. They're just in limbo. And this is kind of what is perpetuating all of this friction that my job as a soldier I'm being sent to do. And it's escalating and there's violence and it just perpetuates this conflict. But we could, and people have tried to end this conflict, but the government isn't interested. And so that was for me, that realization, I already had it in the West Bank, um, began to be like, well, so wait a second. So you're saying like I left everything behind, my whole family, all my friends, this whole kind of like normal track of life that, just to be here and these hilltops, helping, facilitate this expansionist ideological project that like I don't know if I really agree with it. That was like a one of the first kind of difficulties that I was having. And I really think what was hardest for me was not just like, wow, I can't believe Israel is doing this. It was more like, I can't believe I'm doing this. Like, I can't believe I left everything to do this. And it wasn't like I wasn't the only one who was feeling that. Like a lot of the soldiers I was with were also like, what is going on here? We're not, I remember one of my friends who gave me like, he would wear like a Peace Now shirt underneath his army uniform, and he would be like, yeah, like these guys, these people shouldn't be here. We shouldn't be here. Um, and so yeah, that was the beginning. And that got worse in the summer of 2014. Because in summer of 2014, there was this kidnapping and murder of these three Israeli teenagers.
Before you tell that
Um,
story,
yeah,
before you tell that story,
go
just
go ahead.
what does it feel like to tell that story you told before? What does it feel like to revisit that? How is that, you know, emotionally, how have you experienced that since that experience?
You know, it's interesting because I haven't actually told this story in a while. But when I was at Breaking the Silence, that was kind of like one of the things that I would tell all the time people about like this kind of this realization that I had. But it's something that brings up like these emotions of betrayal and of kind of shattering of disillusionment. Um, and yeah, it's something that I felt very, very strongly then, and I still feel it. I can still feel it when I kind of relive that process that I went through of being
Hmm.
like this very eager, idealistic yeshiva student joining the IDF, and then like you know, like taking teenagers out of their beds in the middle of the night and realizing like this isn't all add up. Like this isn't I'm not saving the world here. I'm just,
Hmm.
maintaining something that is really morally dubious. So yeah, it's a tough thing to go through. And I think that um I thought about it a little bit when you were talking about the conversations you were having with your friends. Um, it's so much easier to just say we have no choice.
Hmm.
It's just it's so much easier. And like I know it's like a cop out, but I understand why people need to do it because it's so much harder to to look in the mirror and be like, we're doing something that's horrible, that's not justified, and we do have another choice, and we're just not making it.
Yeah.
And it's just painful, and it's something that especially when you took part in it, it's not something easy to do. Um, in Israeli society and in American society, there's all these things that are also preventing you from reflecting. Like if you speak critically, they start jumping down your throat, start calling you a traitor, start calling you a self-hating Jew. You're helping the anti-Semites. So in my experience, most Israelis who have these experiences and have these kind of doubts, they just disconnect, put them in a little box. Many of them travel abroad. Even when they come back after years of traveling abroad or for many months traveling abroad, they kind of like they're here, they live their lives, but like they don't want to talk about politics. Like politics is like this kind of disgusting, having the deep conversations. It's like really something that is discouraged, and there's just all these kind of barriers that very intentionally, I think, have been set up to prevent people from reflecting and having an open conversation. And it's not healthy. but it's also it's not it's not easy to do that, because it's, yeah, it's very, very unpleasant. It's very, um, you know, I think that in many ways, because of the activism and the kind of stuff that I've got involved with, it kind of makes it a little bit easier because I can like look and say, hey, yeah, I had this experience. I did these terrible things. I did these things that, I don't believe are justified, but like I'm doing something about it. I'm like speaking out about it. And it's not that easy to have those opportunities. I feel very lucky that I was able to find and connect to people. Most people don't have that. There's so many obstacles, there's no outlet. And that means to have those difficult conversations and to reflect on those experiences, it's just like, like you don't have it. No one's gonna, no one's gonna like give you a job, or there's not like a community that will embrace you. Uh, those things don't exist, for, for most people. Those opportunities don't exist for most people.
So yeah, I'll say that like when I think back at my education, and I grew up in a very Zionist household and I had like a very Zionistic upbringing. I had a lot of like Zionism classes, over the course of my education. What's just incredible to me is the way in which my whole world has like erased the Palestinian people, like from the story, like completely, like they don't even exist anymore. You know what I'm saying? Which is like pretty morally obscene, but even like on a political level, like even just practically speaking, when you're dealing with millions and millions of people, this like project of erasure is ridiculous. It's like completely absurd. And then what happened to me, and I think can happen to other people, is like, oh my God, there's like actually millions of people here who like have a connection to the land, who have like an identity, who like have a culture and like a political aspiration, and like you can't just pretend they don't exist. You know what I'm saying? And it's like it resulted in me feeling like very bitter actually towards like a lot of my education, and the people that I looked up to. So yeah, I wonder if that resonates at all with your experience.
Yeah. It's interesting that I think I was like a bit of I grew up like pretty, um, I didn't grow up with, I know that we learned about Israel. I knew that we did some classes, but I felt like maybe it was just because I was like a bad student, or like I never internalized it. Like it was never like, to me, like the Israel Day Parade was just like a social thing. It wasn't like, I never really had strong feelings about Israel and or Zionism one way or the other. Like it was, of course, it was like an axiom. Like, oh yeah, of course we support Israel. It's like, but it wasn't like something I was really passionate about. And I think I just kind of, I was like, I'm sure you were, we were both at the same age. Like my whole worldview in terms of like global politics and stuff like that, and was like shaped by like 9/11. And I kind of viewed the whole world as like not just Palestinians, but like the entire Muslim world and the entire Arab world was just like the bad guys. Like they just hated us, and they hated progress, and they hated Western values, and they hated freedom. And and I just kind of saw Israel as just like, oh, that's just like another, that's just like, and I think my views kind of were maturing a little bit. Um, you know, as I grew up, I met Muslims when I was in high school, and I realized like they were,
Just like
they were a
us.
nice, what they're, yeah, they're just,
Just like us,
human
yeah.
beings. Exactly. I would go down to, Hunter College. I don't know if you ever went to go practice in the Hunter College wrestling room. I met like Muslim kids who were wrestling in New York City, and it was like, oh, you're Muslim. Cool. Like we're just wrestling. Yeah, so I think that for me, it wasn't so, it was something that I was more directly upset at the Israeli leaders. Like it wasn't something I felt like was really forced down my throat growing up. I because it maybe I just wasn't paying attention. I just wasn't passionate about it. But it was, for me, it was more of the immediate like aftermath of like the Israeli society that sent me to fight this war in Gaza. Um, and just is not interested in in doing anything to prevent it from happening again, is not talking about it, not urgent. Um, that was like the betrayal that I felt most powerfully. Of course, like I have learned about like the systematic kind of, yeah, like historic, very, very curated historical narrative that's presented. And I think it's problematic. Um, and that's kind of a lot of what I've been doing, is meeting with young Jews who, are on gap year programs, are on college programs, and trying to show them and introduce them to Palestinians, introduce them to human rights activists, introduce them to different perspectives, and break that down.
Maybe let's talk now about the 2014 Gaza war that you participated in and how that affected your thinking.
Yeah, sure. The 2014 Gaza war, um, like I said, started this major escalation started when these three kids were kidnapped and murdered. I was in the north of the West Bank. Lots and lots of soldiers in around the area where they were kidnapped, and in the surrounding areas were focused on finding the kids. Basically, the Israeli public was led on to believe that might be still alive, even though there was very, very strong indications that they weren't. But they were looking for the bodies. Um, Bring our boys home. Um, but I was in the north of the West Bank, and they basically told us, we're not looking for the kids. We're doing something called cleaning the stables. We're going to go out now every night, and we're going to arrest more Palestinians than we've ever arrested. All of them are Hamas affiliated peoples, and we just arrested people. We arrested people who had been released in the Gilad Shalit prisoner exchange. We arrested dozens and dozens of people. Major, major crackdown. At a certain point, we ran out of people to arrest. And so they were just sending us into villages, into neighborhoods to kind of like do intimidation, in the middle of the night, to just go into people's houses. And then Hamas started firing rockets from the Gaza Strip into Israel. And then they decided that we're going to do this invasion. We went down south, we prepared, we went in, and there was all this bombardment, very, very heavy bombardment of the areas. Before we went in, we were told that there were these tunnels that we were there to destroy. And basically, we were there to eliminate the threat that Hamas posed. Um, we were told, they can sneak in these tunnels and they can carry out massacres. They're planning on doing it. We need to eliminate this threat. And we were there for like a few weeks. It was very, you know, there were, every day was like, we're advanced, we're spreading out, building a perimeter around the engineers who are there to demolish the tunnels. We were told that there were no civilians in the areas that we were in, that they had all been warned and they had all fled. And therefore, we would basically go into every house that we went into with live fire, firing grenades, firing shoulder fire rockets. It was almost entirely true that the civilians had left, but it wasn't entirely true. One of the houses that I was in, I found you know, the body of an elderly woman who was killed by, some explosion of shrapnel of a bomb or an artillery shell. Um, and We moved on to another neighborhood, and in the second neighborhood we were in, they found an entire family in one of the houses, and they somehow they realized that they were not terrorists, and they didn't harm them, shoot at them, they didn't open fire and kill them. And I never saw this family, but I heard about it. It was like something that I heard about the very next day, and was being talked about. They basically guarded them, from what I understand. They guarded them. They gave them food. They gave them water for many days as we secured this perimeter for the engineers to demolish the tunnel. Um, After a few days in the second neighborhood, one of the houses that we had taken over was targeted by anti-tank missile, and there was kind of a mass casualty event. Like there was one soldier who was killed and many others who were injured. There was a very complicated evacuation.
You were there for
All
that?
of this. I wasn't in the house that it happened. I was a few houses, over. I heard basically everything happening on the radio. Um, and but the next morning we left that built up area, and as soon as we left the area, the Air Force came and basically flew over the neighborhood we were in and just basically dropped bomb after bomb after bomb, and like basically flattened the neighborhood. There were, you know, very few buildings that were left standing. And I remember at the time, like one of my friends, came over to me and he was like, they killed that family that we found. I had heard that basically what they did was they arrested all of the men in the family. So all the men who were adults and who weren't elderly, they had arrested them and sent them into Israel for interrogation. And basically, they still left the kids and the family and the women and the elderly in the house. And he was sure that as we were watching these Air Force jets fly over the neighborhood and bombing them, they killed the family. And I told him, like, I'm sure they're not bombing the house where the family was because they knew where they are, so they're not killing them. Um, and Years later, I actually I looked it up and I found out that actually they were killed.
Wow.
8 members of this family were killed. As you know, just a few hundred meters away from me in the houses that I was in. Um, and that was something that really struck me. In addition to this image that I was stuck in my head for a long time of like finding the corpse of an elderly woman. Um, just realizing like everyone thinks that this is like we're doing everything in our power to prevent civilian casualties, and I was like, that's not true. Like, how on earth did they not avoid killing this family in this area that was cleared? That we went house to house, we eliminated any threat. There was nothing in that neighborhood that posed a threat at the time that we left. They fired. They didn't fire from within the neighborhood. The rocket. They fired it from far away. And how did they not avoid killing this family? And I just realized like there's a huge cost to this war that the Palestinians paid. Everyone was focused on like the sacrifices that we made and the soldier, and of course that was something that was really um, struck very close to home. One of my friends was injured, from my unit was injured in that explosion. But I just kind of like left with this thought and this reflection of like how do we avoid this from happening again? How do this is horrific. Um, what I saw. Um, and and there was something that like really kind of dedicated my life kind of in many ways to answering that question, to go reading books, taking courses. I went and studied Middle Eastern studies at university. Um, I got involved in kind of all sorts of political kind of extracurricular activities. And I realized that no one was doing anything to prevent it from happening again. They
Mhm.
were actually strengthening Hamas. They were sending money. They were because they wanted ultimately to expand the settlement project in the West Bank, and they wanted at all costs to prevent a Palestinian state from being created. It was actually convenient for them to have the Palestinian leadership split and to have Hamas in power in the Gaza Strip. And they facilitated the transfer of hundreds of millions of dollars every year from Qatar to Hamas, and basically, allowing them to thrive, and basically further delegitimizing and sanctioning the factions, the Palestinian factions, and the Palestinian human rights organizations that recognize international law, that were willing to negotiate with Israel, that were, renounce terrorism. Those were the main targets because those Palestinians actually had international legitimacy and actually could feasibly create international pressure. Whereas if the Palestinian leadership was split and there was Hamas, no one will go. They have no international legitimacy, and so that was what, like, coming out of the experience from of being in Gaza, of not knowing when I was going to get out, and seeing friends, breaking down, and seeing them losing loved ones, and seeing homes, entire neighborhoods being demolished, and understanding that we just dealt such a devastating blow to Palestinians. I mean, now it all looks pales in comparison to what's happening right now. But at the time, I witnessed like an entire neighborhood just being erased by Air Force bombs,
Mhm.
and found, this is very post-apocalyptic. I mean, the I think the scale is much broader and it's affecting more areas. But what I saw in Beit Hanun was post-apocalyptic. You
Mhm.
know, neighborhoods that have just been bombed out, that are abandoned, that are that are, like, it's you never know. You go through a house, you find a body, you don't know, like, is there bodies, how many bodies are there here? It's like, it's it was something that I just couldn't really kind of move beyond. And that was kind of what set me on this course to get involved with activism. And it's still something that is, motivating me today. Obviously, I have a lot of questions today about, how I could have been more effective. Obviously, I've in many ways failed, like, to, not just me, but many Israelis and many peace activists internationally who have been speaking out about these. We've failed to convince enough people to prevent what's happening now from happening. So I think, we have to, obviously, we can't give up and we can't stop. It's more urgent than ever, and I think more people maybe are waking up to how the urgency. But we have to think about how we can convince people to oppose these policies, because it's just going to happen again, especially the way the current government is operating.
The standard line of response that I hear from my family members and right-wing friends is like, they teach their kids to hate us. There's nothing we can do. They teach their kids to hate us. And yeah, it's just such a failure of imagination. It's just like such a failure of like empathy, of understanding. Like the only way you can conceptualize why there's a struggle is because they teach their kids to hate us, and not like just generations of trauma, generations of conflict and cycles of violence and people being expelled from their land. You know what I'm saying? It's such a self-serving narrative that so many people tell themselves, and it's so limiting and so limited. It's so sad.
Yeah, I'll tell you something. I found in one of the houses that I was in, we went in there, we went into the house with live fire, of course. And I get into the bedroom of one of the kids. I find a plastic rifle. And I had also been taught this about Palestinians. I heard this, oh, they're taught to hate. And I took the plastic rifle and I like smashed it into pieces. And I was like, they are teaching their kids to fight against us. And I thought about it a little bit, like, the next few days, and also like after the war, reflecting on it. And I realized, like, first of all, kids play with guns, right? All kids play with toy
Yeah.
guns. Second of all, this kid, I'm in this kid's house with a real fucking gun. I just fired a grenade onto the roof of his house and I blew up the water tank, and his house is basically flooding with water. Uh, his neighbors' houses have been bombed and demolished. Maybe one of his neighbors was killed. Um, you know, I think about how Israel has been affected by October 7th. And in 2014, more Palestinian civilians were killed in Gaza than Israeli civilians were killed on October 7th. And I'm sure there are kids who were 12 years old when I was inside Beit Hanun, when the Israeli Air Force was pulverizing their neighbors' homes or their homes, who went ahead and grew up and joined Hamas and participated in the massacre in October 7th. And of course, nothing justifies it. But what the fact that we aren't doing anything to create a political alternative, to say there are Palestinians who are willing to negotiate with us, who are willing to recognize Israel, who are saying openly, we renounce terrorism, we want to coexist with Israel. And they have nothing to show for that compromise. The, and then we go ahead and we fight these wars and we create all this destruction, and we think that once it's over, like, we can just go back to maintaining the status quo and just kind of managing the conflict. That's, if you think it's the textbooks that's the problem, like, it's not about, you don't have to have empathy to just understand that, like, this is this is not the mechanics of this. This is we are destroying these people's lives. We are crushing any hope that they can have collective freedom and independence, something that's so valuable to us that we cherish, that we hold on to. And you think that they're fighting against us because like the textbooks, they don't need any textbooks. Grow up in a neighborhood that's been bombed out. Grow up in a neighborhood where you don't have the right to travel freely, that you're, you know, it's not yeah, I think you're right. There's a lack of imagination, but it's like it's detached from reality. It's just you haven't really thought about you haven't really thought about that. You haven't really, and that's, something that I think we have to address. We have to find ways to convince these people. Read the history, learn a little bit about the past. Um, I hope maybe some of your friends will watch this,
Yeah.
that are making these standard answers, and watch this conversation. Maybe they'll have their interest piqued, and maybe they will read Ami Ayalon's book.
Yeah.
So
Here's maybe an impossible question. I know a lot of people who are in Gaza, actually. For example, just to pick one person of many that I know, I have family members. There's a kid that I coached that for a while who I love dearly. I love dearly. And he's in Gaza and he sends updates, he sends pictures. I see how he's going. This might be an impossible question, but what would you say to the people, the soldiers, Israeli soldiers in Gaza today? What should they be thinking about? What are they going through? What can you, given your experience, what, yeah, what can you say about that experience?
yeah, it's something that I have a lot of relatives. I have like lots of friends who are also in Gaza right now, and some people have reached out because of I've been outspoken, and I wrote this piece in the New York Times, and I was on international television, like saying that my friends or my cousins or have seen it, and it's like demoralizing. um and it's obviously hard to hear, and it saddens me. I spoke to somebody. There are people who I had coffee with the past few weeks who are back in Gaza after, I met with them after they were in Gaza, and now they're back in Gaza. And it's just like, look out for yourself. Like, you know, uh, you know, like, I hope it ends soon. I hope you're back home safe soon. Um, you know, uh, Most of the people I know that I'm friends with, like, it's not like I believe that, they're going to be doing something like, egregiously immoral, or they'll, you know, I've read reports of people that are just firing on one, unarmed people, that those are orders that people are being given. And, we've had some high profile incidences of it. Um, it's like, to me, if there was a real, like, I thought that there was a person who might do that, and there's a chance that I could talk them, out of, like, like being careful, and like seeing the humanity, and trying to convince them that, like, the people who are living in Gaza right now are going to be the people that we're going to have to make peace with ultimately, and therefore you should be careful with their property and their lives. And um if I thought, like, but I think ultimately, like, it's not like the individual soldier who really, in some ways, the soldiers are like it's hard to believe this, but I think the soldiers are a moderating force, in my experience. Obviously, there's a whole spectrum. There are people who voted for Itamar Ben-Gvir, who are completely genocidal, who now have weapons and are now in the Gaza Strip, and who knows what they're doing. If they are acting on the rhetoric that is being said. But I know that there's a lot of people who are not genocidal, who are in the IDF right now, and they're going beyond what is being allowed, or they're being told to do, in terms of the way they're treating civilians. I think the problem, like in my experience in Gaza, that what I told you earlier about this family, like, if those soldiers could just follow the letter of what they were told, they would have gone into that house with live fire, and they would have killed everyone in that house. I mean, it ended up not really mattering because the Air Force came and bombed the house and killed the entire family. But to me, it felt like the soldiers on the ground, the infantry soldiers from my unit who went into that house, they went beyond to ensure the safety. And I think the problem isn't so much the behavior of the individual soldiers, but ultimately it's clear that the government is using the military right now to create mass destruction, and to make Gaza uninhabitable, to forcibly displace, ethnically cleanse millions of Palestinians from the Gaza Strip. And there's not really anything that I can say to one soldier that's going to change that. Um, so just, wishing that it ends and hoping that he's safe and hoping that he comes back. There's not a lot you can do from the inside of the military to change anything. Um, it's it's sad, but like there's really nothing it's a tragic situation for them too. Like, I mean, obviously, like they're not suffering, the soldiers aren't suffering anywhere near to what the Gazan people are suffering, but you know, I think that the soldiers are being victimized by these policies too, and it's very, very it's there's nothing really I can say. There's not a whole lot that I could say. Um, you know, just I think there's a lot of there's a lot of nobility in the self-sacrifice that people are going, and they believe that this is a war that we have no choice but to do it, and they're defending Israel, and they are fighting against Hamas. Hamas is, it's definitely evil, but this is not. That's what they think, and then obviously they are engaging with Hamas. I'm not saying that the IDF is not, fighting against Hamas, but it's just like we discussed, the government has made it clear that their real enemy is not Hamas. The real enemy is political settlement and a Palestinian state. And so it's very tragic. It's hard to, it's something that, it's a conversation that I'll be having with people when they come out. It's a conversation like, I've got my unit right now is up on the northern border. It's a conversation that I have with people in my unit. It's not an easy one, but I've had it since October 7th. It's not really something that I would necessarily, think is like the right time or place to have with somebody who's like, right now risking their life. I understand it's demoralizing, but you know what? I'd rather demoralize people than have them be sent to fight a war and die. Um, that's impossible to win, because we're not going to win. We're not going to win this war with this government, with this policy. Um, where we can dismantle Hamas, and Hamas will just come back, or something worse than Hamas will just come back. We don't fundamentally change our approach, and so I'm still going to continue to speak out. I'm not directing, like I'm not doing this interview so soldiers will see it and they'll think something different. I'm not going on Sky News or BBC or CNN or writing in the New York Times to try to convince soldiers to behave differently, because it's a much bigger it's a it's a problem that our entire society has to face. And soldiers right now are in the least possible situation to really be impacting the discourse as naturally. Um, but yeah, I'm depending on the international community. I'm depending on the Jewish diaspora. I'm depending on Israelis who are not on inside Gaza to speak out, for the sake of the soldiers, among everyone else, whose lives will be safer, whose children will be able to raise their children with the hope that we can be living side by side with Palestinians. I'm doing it just as much for them as I'm doing it for anyone else. Like, truly. And I'm not I'm open. I'm not afraid to say that. Like I really don't think this is. I don't think the IDF soldiers are evil. I know on October 7th itself. Soldiers from my unit, soldiers from other units, friends of mine, um, fought against horrific, horrific, horrifically evil, um, you know, terrorists who did unspeakable things and risked their lives. My unit, Sayeret Nachal, the unit that I served in, was one of the few units that was actually stationed on the Gaza border on October 7th. And I don't know, so like a dozen soldiers. Was one of the units that was very, very heavily suffered, very heavy casualties, but they fought off dozens of Hamas fighters. They saved an entire kibbutz from being massacred. Um, and there's a lot of bravery. There's a lot of really heroic things that the IDF did on October 7th. And I'm sure that there's a lot of bravery and heroic actions that are taking place right now. The problem is the framework and the overriding mission that the IDF is being sent to is unjustifiable and immoral and is causing so much destruction, and that needs to stop. It needs to stop right now, and it needs to stop for everyone's sake, for the Palestinians who are being massacred and who are starving, who are, whose lives have been, whose homes, neighborhoods are uninhabitable, who are the government is trying to force them to be basically ethnically cleansed, for the Palestinians in the West Bank, for Israelis who are fled their homes, who are evacuated, whose communities have been destroyed, um, and for the soldiers too. I mean, I want Israeli soldiers to be safe. I don't want Israeli soldiers to have to sacrifice their lives. And we can avoid it. If we wanted to, we could pursue a political solution. We could start taking concrete steps. We could state our goal of living side by side with Palestinians. The current government has stated the opposite. Their founding principle of the current government is from the river to the sea, exclusive Jewish political control. Exclusive. That's basically what their basic founding coalition principle is. And that's the lifeblood of Hamas. They are able to recruit and they are able to gather support is because they, the people who they're all the alternative to Hamas, which are the people who are saying, let's not carry out terrorist attacks. Let's use diplomacy. Let's, create international pressure. Let's negotiate with Israel. We're open to negotiating with Israel. They've got nothing to show for themselves because the Israeli government has turned their back on them. And that is what creates the conditions for Hamas to gain power. And that's how Hamas gained power after all of the destruction, all of the bombing, all of the killing that we did in 2014. They just got stronger. They just got stronger. And it's something that is so infuriating and people have to wake up to that. People have to wake up to that and understand the only existential threat to Hamas is a political solution where Palestinians and Israelis live side by side. That's the only thing that can defeat Hamas and the idea that animates Hamas.
Yeah. And I think you say so much with your story and with your experience in terms of, life is long and there's going to be life after war. And in the way that you fight for a future as a soldier, you're going to have to figure out how to fight for the future as a civilian. And, it's going to be important to expand your perspective and take the lessons that you've learned and incorporate new information and, continue your journey wherever it takes you. But continuing to, think big and think about the future and, use your experience, use your clout, use your knowledge and your connections to, yeah, secure a better future for these people, for all of us. So I think you exemplify that and you model that in a really inspiring way.
Thank you. I'm doing what I can, and I'm grateful that there are people who are willing to listen and to share the message. And I think it's really urgent, um, yeah, and I hope that you know, we'll be able to in our lifetimes really, see a better future. I think this has been a wake-up call to a lot of people. I do have I do have a little bit of optimism. I think that we could have avoided this, but I think that now that what we've been doing has blown up so catastrophically in people's faces, I think this is an opportunity for people who have been motivated, have had the knowledge, and have thought about this, need to really push themselves to have these difficult conversations and to try to convince people in their circles. Um, and I think that, to me, I honestly like people are always lots of people like salute and congratulate me and say things appreciative. Like to me, kind of hit me over the head. Like I really felt like the circumstances of my life just kind of pushed me in this direction because I had such an intense experience. To me, when I meet people like you, actually, Amichai, who didn't go into Gaza and didn't see it and still had the ability to kind of see through the standard narrative and the lies and are speaking out against it and are, doing, creating and making your voice heard, that really gives me hope that there are, people can be convinced, people can actually change their views who didn't grow up like that, even if they didn't have some kind of like deeply shattering, traumatic, experience. So that's what gives me motivation to continue to talk to people because I'm sure there are lots of people that are like you that haven't maybe just, you know, been exposed to the arguments and been exposed to the history and the information and you know, and that can still be convinced. And if we all do our best to reach those people, then that will create an enormous amount of political power to
Yeah.
change this reality.
So yeah, as a last question, if you're open to answering it, if you have anything you think you want to share or not, um, as someone who's been through combat and has seen, had that experience and has seen the effect on soldiers, obviously physically and psychologically, what goes into healing after a combat experience like that, specifically psychologically? What have you seen in terms of what soldiers need and what they can do to yeah to come out of that experience and be okay?
Yeah, it's a good question. I definitely don't have a full answer to this because I definitely feel like still in the process of trying to heal and trying to um, kind of grapple with this. And it's something that I don't know if you ever say I've done it, but I think that you can kind of live a way that is addressing it, that is part of a process. You can live a kind of a in a way that really helps kind of cope and helps heal and helps reclaim. And I'll break it down into two things. Like um, there's PTSD, which is a like basically a physiological thing, like that a lot of people who and it's not just people who are in combat. It's something that happens to people who are also all sorts of different high stakes, life threatening or very you know, uh, I don't know, I'm not an expert on the precise definition, but it's there. You can have like these physiological symptoms there's something that's in your brain that is making you relive and making you have all sorts of really debilitating symptoms. And I think that that's something that like there's all sorts of treatments. There's psychological treatments. There's medical treatments. Um, I think something that I kind of grapple with, which it took me years to actually kind of really have the language and to like learn about this, and is something called moral injury, which is distinct in that it's not it also has like symptoms and whatnot. And again, I'm also not an expert, but I have read about this and I have talked about this with people. And when I learned about it at first, I was like, oh, that's what I have. And basically, it's kind of this experience of realizing you're in a high stakes, a dangerous situation, or you witness something that is very, very sharply um, against everything you believe, your whole system of moral values. And it doesn't have to be necessarily something that you disagree with politically, but like, if you your whole life are raised to believe that, you protect innocent people, you protect children, you protect women, and then you end up uh, killing a woman or killing a child, or you're doing something horrible that's completely, maybe you didn't have a choice. One of the things, there are these soldiers were in Afghanistan who shot and killed a 12-year-old kid who was pointing a gun at them. Like that's something that can just kind of shake your whole values and kind of create this kind of disconnect um, from everything you knew, and kind of make you isolate and cut yourself off from society. And I think that for me, like it's something that it happens really. It's not just the danger or it's something that happens when you reflect on what you've done. And for me, when I came out of Gaza and I thought about like the fact that the unit that I was in, we killed an elderly woman. We destroyed, we went into people's houses, we destroyed people's houses, we destroyed people's lives. And it was something that I just very hard for me to reconcile with everything that I had grown up believing is like what is good and what is bad. And I had this kind of disgust and this aversion to being part of a society that I was, part of. And it's something that like there's this type of kind of uh, re- therapy that it's really designed to kind of help people recommit and reclaim their values and their systems. And I think that there's a lot of seeking community and talking about things. It was very, very valuable for me to be able to go. I did this program with it's called Peace of Mind in English. In Hebrew, it's called Masashi But I flew with with my unit, my army unit, and then we just all shared and we all talked and we all processed, and we never done it. Like it took us 9 years to open up to each other because there's all these boundaries in Israeli society that keep us from talking and keep us from being open. Um, and so finding a community of people who are like committed to the values that you are and trying to kind of reclaim who you are, maybe is I think like a really important part of healing and part of um, you know uh, responding health in a healthy way to having these types of experiences. And of course, use it for me. I think part of that is using the experience that I had to prevent it. For me, a lot of this reflection is has led me to political developing a political awareness of very critical political awareness. And so being involved with that and being involved in trying to prevent what I saw and what I participated in from happening again, that's I think a big part of kind of a healing process for me personally.
Yeah.
Um, and I think it's not necessarily what everyone sorry, not necessarily what everyone goes through or what everyone needs, but that's for me one aspect of it that's very important and has been very meaningful for me to be able to do.
Bensy, I want you to know I love you. It's been years. We wrestled together, but I think of you like a brother almost. It's been a long time. We haven't been in touch, but I feel deeply connected to you. And I just am incredibly inspired by you and grateful for what you do. And thank you so much for just taking the time to talk to me today. I'm really, really grateful.
Thanks, Amichai. I really appreciate it, and I'm glad we made it work. And your questions were all very heartfelt, and I have a very deep love and appreciation for you too. And it's refreshing to have these kind of conversations with somebody who really knows me, going back, all those years. You've really seen my whole trajectory. So thank you.